Hi, this is Rex from the Rex Andrews Show. Glad to have you this morning. For those who are new and just found us, we are glad to have you here. And for those who have been coming back and subscribed, thank you, because we are now in one of the top 10 growing podcasts in traffic. So thank you for doing that. We're excited to have a great guest today, and this is going to be a fun show. I'll tell you that, but we got a little bit of house cleaning up front. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or you catch us on social media. We're on all the major platforms, wherever you get your podcasts. So it's Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, Pandora, you name it. We're out there everywhere. But you can always find us on our website at rexandrewshow.com. Okay, well, I can't wait. I'm going to get a little bit of bio here before we get started. My guest today is quite a special one, and she's done some really interesting things. And before I announce, I'm going to give a little bit of her portfolio. She's regularly featured on Good Morning America, the Today Show, Dr. Oz. She also has been featured in print and People Magazine, our good friends over at W Magazine, Shape, Glamour, Town and Country, and many more. She's an exciting, fast-growing star in her industry. I'd like to introduce you to Brooke Alper. Good morning, Brooke. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to understand your story today. And I think what's interesting is, I'm in Colorado, and people who follow me know that. I'm just outside of Boulder. And Colorado was the first state for legalization of both recreational and medicinal marijuana. And people always associate CBD with those, but there's really a difference, right? Oh, and for those watching on YouTube, it's not that I fell down the stairs and banged my head. And it's not a cheap yarmulke. I basically had a little procedure today, so I've got this little funny thing on my head. So if you want to laugh along with me, please do. Anyway, so back to the topic here. Not a lot of people understand CBD. You see it all over the place today. It's in gas stations, a lot of stuff. I think there's a lot of misinformation, but I want to set that aside because I want to know, how did you get here? What's the backstory to all this? I mean, so let's start off. Where'd you grow up? What was your family life like? Tell us a little bit of that.
Sure. So I grew up outside of New York City, out in Long Island. I had a really, a lucky childhood. I have my parents and an older brother and a really close-knit family. I grew up horseback riding competitively, so I was at school a little bit, but at the barn a lot more. So I was basically a barn rat. My mom would drop me off, whenever there wasn't school, I'd be there, for 10 hours a day with my horses. So
what type of horses did you guys raise?
I was a jumper, so I would do, jumping, the equestrian world more than racing. So I had everything from thoroughbreds to sort of a big warm bloods, a Russian warm blood. And I like the big horses the best. I'm almost 5'10", so even as a teenager, I needed the bigger horses. So
now, did you venture into dressage at all, or what was it, just jumping?
Yeah. So equitation and jumping, those were my things. And then I even went to college to get to ride with a good team.
Wow.
So there's some really good collegiate teams out there. So that was a great experience.
Well, that's great. So You must be a little tough because people fall off of jumping horses, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, people fall off of all horses, right? It's a risky sport. It's no matter where you're doing it or what kind of sport you're doing, what kind of version of it you're doing. You're dealing with animals.
That's right.
So yeah, I have many injuries still today, even though I haven't been on a horse in nearly 20 years. I still suffer from the injuries, but the lessons that I learned from having to care for animals and the responsibilities and the dedication, I think really set me up to be like a decent human being. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity.
Well, the one thing I do know, my dad was a little bit of a horse whisperer. He broke horses. He broke horses when we were kids. And it just used to almost freak us out. He would be at a corral somewhere and, the horse is jumping around and rearing up and all that stuff. And he'd take a dive here and there and then get back up. So I imagine with jumping, that's probably even a little more risky than just standard, riding horses around. So
Yeah.
anyway, great. All right. So take us past that. You went to college for this?
So yeah, I went to college. I went to a super small school outside of Baltimore so that I could ride competitively there. And it was a great experience. And then after college, I moved straight to New York City.
Okay.
My parents actually wouldn't let me move home. I think, I think their goal for me was if you move back home, it's much harder to eventually leave home.
That's right.
So they, were very kind to set me up. My mom helped me get a small apartment and they gave me a little bit of funds to get me through the first few months. But then it was like time to get a job and get to work. And you're an adult now. So it, but I think that a lot of that cowgirl, style is just sort of like you just hop on this horse, and just sort of what I did. And so after I graduated college, I ended up getting a job at Vogue magazine.
Wow.
And so I worked at Vogue, and then I went through the launch of Teen Vogue as, very much like the Devil Wears Prada positions.
Right.
And it was another great experience. It was humbling. It was, educational. It was a great entrance into the working world. But while I was there, I was having, some stomach issues and, just wasn't feeling my best. So I went to a dietitian.
Mm-hmm.
And after a couple of sessions, I looked at my dietitian. I'm like, wait, this is what you get to do all day. You get to talk about like food and pooping and exercise. I'm like, this is like an awesome job. And like,
I'm not sure the pooping part's what I want to do, but yeah, go ahead.
I still have the sense of humor of like a 12-year-old boy. So like, like poop talk is funny to me. Like you should hear my kids, but I was just like, this is an awesome job. So I became really inspired and I ended up going back to school. I started school going back to become a dietitian at NYU. And so I was working full time and then started going back to school just to see after 3 or 4 years out of, the school world, what it would feel like. And I loved it. And so I eventually quit my job and went back to school. And it took me just over 4 years to become a dietitian and I get my master's in science.
So you went all the way through a master's then, huh?
Oh yeah.
Wow. You're quite the story because you didn't hop very far, Long Island to Baltimore, back to the city, New York City. So, wow, the country mouse living in the city, plus you go from, I wouldn't call you a cowboy, but maybe a cowgirl, and you go right to Vogue. I mean, wow, that's basically pivoting like 180, isn't it?
Yeah, it just sort of was where I landed and you just do what the job entails. And so, there's definitely a learning curve, but I think again, that's what the lessons of horseback riding and that responsibility is. You just sort of you fit on the horse. You don't, get the horse to change for you.
Yeah.
You change who you are for the type of horse you're riding. And so I think that was a great lesson that still can carry on for the rest of my life.
Well, I'm going to bet that nobody that was sitting in cubicles next to you had mucked stalls before.
No, I don't think they had. No.
So that's quite an experience difference. Okay, so you got your to become a dietitian, and you opened up your practice. Or did you go to work for someone else?
No, right when I became a dietitian, I was engaged to my husband, and he knew what my ultimate goal was. I really wanted a private practice. I had a whole vision of what my business would look like.
Okay.
And at that point, we didn't have a mortgage. We didn't have children. We had very few responsibilities, besides just being selfishly about us. And so we made the decision that if I was going to have to struggle, and build a business, it was time. So I went straight from school into opening my own practice.
Now you still practice today, don't you? That's part of your.
I do. I see very, very few patients now. My business is still up and running, and I have, my associates see everybody. After nearly 15 years of a lot of one-on-one nutrition counseling, it became a little bit less enjoyable. And so I was really lucky to find another way to pivot. And throughout the years, even the last 15 years, I've pivoted, whether it was, when I first started my business, all I could think of is that I wanted this practice where it was like nutrition counseling, where I was sitting in a chair and I had patients or clients on my couch and we would talk about food. I'd weigh them, I'd give them the answers they were looking for and move on. And that was great. But then I somehow, fell into consulting work. I fell into writing another, to a book, which then led to the first of 3 books. So I think being really open-minded and being willing to go where sometimes life takes you is really healthy. And I think it allowed me to pivot my career and grow it at a much faster rate than I think I would have had if it was my own imagination creating it.
Wow. So let's take a pause for a second. Tell me about your 3 books. What are their titles and what did you write?
Sure. So the first book was, I had just had my first daughter. And so the first book was Healthy Eating During Pregnancy.
Oh, nice.
So very, traditional, healthy, standard book. And then next came The Sugar Detox, which I co-wrote with a good friend who's a dermatologist. And it was all about, how to change the way you're eating and then also your skincare so that you can really sort of fight premature aging and the physical signs of aging on your body.
Okay.
And then my last book was The Diet Detox, which really was helping people sort of look at all the diets out there and kind of just figure out like a healthy way to eat. It's sort of saying no to all the fad diets and just sort of streamlining and into a way that really makes sense. That was less about deprivation and more about logic.
Wow. I'm assuming all of those are publicly available like on Amazon and places?
Absolutely. Yes.
Fantastic. I'm telling you that middle one is something I'm really interested in because I'm a type 2 diabetic and I'm trying to end that. And so detoxifying sugar is so bad. It's just, and I'm terrible because I have a sweet tooth. So anyway. All right. So, wow, that's impressive. So how many years did it take you to write the 3 books?
It's funny. The first one sort of fell in my lap. I was sort of asked to write this book, but the second 2 were my own creations. And, from start to finish, it takes forever because you come up with this concept. Then you need to do all your research to make sure that there is nothing out there. You need to get a book agent. This was before really self-publishing made sense.
Right.
You write a book proposal, which is like a mini book. Mm-hmm. Then you go and you shop it around. So, the whole process, each book probably took, over 2 years.
Wow.
So it's a long process. The writing part is actually the shortest part of it all.
Right.
Yeah.
I've worked with several authors and it's something I have always toyed about doing, but I just understand what an effort it is. And when you submit your manuscript, they have ideas to turn it into a product and you want to tell a story and yeah, it's quite the detailed process. So about 6-year period of, doing each one of those then? Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So one of the reasons we reached out to you is you got married to your husband and all of a sudden there were some health issues, or did he have his health issues before? Can you lay down that backstory for us?
Sure. I think hindsight's 2020.
Right.
And he and I knew that he had some health issues. He was very ill as a kid and there was complications from his illness. So some health issues, I knew what I was getting. But as we were dating and our relationship was progressing, we started to realize that there were some new developments that were happening. And in hindsight, I think they were all connected to his original illness. But right now, what he basically he was diagnosed with something called autoimmune peripheral neuropathy.
Okay.
Which is just big fancy words for meaning he's in a ton of pain from his knees down and his elbows down, all the peripheral nerves. And yep. And basically the autoimmune part just means his body is attacking itself. So we don't know why. There's, very little research done on autoimmune diseases to begin with. But in hindsight, even when we met, Todd could never, we would never go for a long walk together. Or, even we would work out at the gym together, but even thinking back now of the work that he would do at the gym, it was never on the treadmill. He really, I don't think he even knew that he couldn't stand that long back then. Wow. And so as our relationship progressed and we had kids, we really started to see his limitations and that this was not just, okay, I'm having a bad back or, I have, let's say what is, like tendinitis in my foot. It turns bigger. And, the poor guy being married to a dietitian, you can only imagine like the diets and the research that I put him through. And at one point in time, his symptoms are very similar to MS. And I became obsessed with this doctor. Her name is Dr. Terry Walls. And she wrote the Walls protocol for MS patients. She's also, she has MS. And with her diet, she basically got herself out of a wheelchair into a fully functioning, physician again.
Wow.
So the problem is the diet involves like a lot of liver and a lot of cabbage.
Oh my goodness.
At one point, those were like the basis of his meals. And I tortured him. I really did. And so, and then anytime I'd be at a conference or I'd meet a new doctor through work or something, I dragged my poor husband there. He was like a human, pinprick. Like it was anyone I could meet. I'm like, take his blood, learn about him. Let's fix this, because he's my partner. He was suffering. And, it's very hard to watch the people you love suffer and not be able to do something. And then add in the fact that I have, some sort of medical training. I think it was a real struggle. But after, couple of years of me torturing him, he sat me down and was like, no more diets, no more doctors. Let's just like be like husband and wife.
So he got tired of being a lab rat, huh?
Yeah. And, in his defense, none of even the most extreme diets were making a big enough impact to make it worth it. Okay. Right? If eating liver and cabbage relieved him of all his pain, I think it would have been a very different story. If some of the more restrictive diets of gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, grain-free, everything free, I think if he had like more than like a 6%, improvement, I think he would have stuck to it, but nothing really worked.
Well, excuse me. One of the challenges with those with neuropathy, because I have a little bit of that, and it's not extreme like your husband's situation, but how do you measure? Is it 10% better today, or is it 8%, or is it 50%? There are things I know that I do, and there are behaviors that control some of that. But gosh, you poor guy. If he's free everything, he's down to drinking water, right? And you have no way to basically measure those things, because I'm a computer scientist and marketing guy, and we measure everything. So I feel for your husband, because man, what a lab rat situation. And then to add in the complexities of a marriage relationship and then kids. Yeah. Oh my.
Yeah. And he's such a trooper. He's a good guy. So it's hard to watch him suffer. And you're right. There's no way for every time I'd ask him, are you feeling better? How do you feel today? It's this really arbitrary score for him, right? So like on a scale of 0 to 10, like, well, yesterday he was at a 9, he couldn't get out of bed. Today he's at a 7, but is it because of the diet? Is it because he rested all day yesterday? It's very hard to pinpoint, versus in marketing, it's like you put this ad up and what's the return, right?
Right.
There's very little ways to count when it comes to autoimmune issues, or especially, the one that he suffers from, to sort of figure out what is better. Okay. And so, I joked that when he said that he just wanted me as his wife, I'd rather him ask to like see other people, because, it was very hard to just sort of sit back. And so, it was something, especially that was the dynamic of our relationship, where I became his caregiver. I was in charge of the food, all the decisions that he'd make, and to step back, it was necessary, and it was a healthy step back, but it was still a struggle. It's like, even with my kids, letting them grow up, it was hard. So letting my husband not constantly work on his health issues was very hard.
I bet.
For me.
Yeah. Because you're sitting there loving him and trying to help him, and then he comes to you and says, "You're fired. I need,"
He fired me. Yes.
You're fired. And, I need to see other people, and not in the weird way. No, I need to see other experts, because you can't be about that. I've had experiences with that, and it's just really hard to separate the business side and the personal side and the
Yeah.
care side. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
So how long did you struggle with that? I mean, did it take you a while to get through your being fired by your husband?
Well, so I definitely took a step back. He was, whatever groceries he wanted, they were here in the house. I relinquished a lot of control, and but it was around that time, it was quite serendipitous that I started just seeing some studies that were just popping up in the usual research I do, or the articles I read about CBD.
Okay.
And it really it came out of nowhere. I just started reading these articles, and then as the science nerd I am, I read one and then it makes me want to find more and more, because it triggers something, and I didn't even know what was triggered then.
Right.
But I started finding more and more articles about CBD and pain, and CBD and PTSD. And
Okay.
Todd suffers from PTSD from a lot of his childhood, illness issues.
Okay.
And so I did some research. I tried to find a brand that I could feel comfortable, giving my husband. And I found a company that, seemed to check all the boxes that I needed, and I handed it to him. And we joke that Todd is what I would call cannabis friendly,
right.
Which is just a polite way of saying he's a pothead. So I think that
when I read that on your bio, I almost fell over laughing, because not a whole lot of people are willing to admit that.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think that in hindsight, he's been self-medicating, with it for a very long time. But so, I thought cannabis friendly. We even had t-shirts made up, cannabis friendly just seems a little bit more sophisticated. So,
yeah, that's what we called the kids that hang out in the smoking pit in high school. They were the potheads. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that he's an adult living in New York City, he's cannabis friendly versus a pothead.
Oh,
so
you're more politically correct. That's pretty woke. That's pretty cool. Anyway.
And so I handed him, this quality CBD that I found, and I said, eat whatever you want, do whatever you want. I don't know much about this, but it's made from pot. Just give it a try. And he was like, sure.
I have to you couldn't give up, could you? You still had to be his doctor, right? You'd been fired and you still were giving him suggestions. That's great.
Yeah. But I stumbled upon something that seemed interesting.
Right.
And I just said, take it, do what you want with it. Let's just give it a shot. And I wasn't telling him not to eat stuff. I wasn't taking away anything. So I think that he was open-minded.
So at that point in time, you were the passive-aggressive nutritionist, right?
This should be the title of my next book, yes.
That's great. Oh, you're fired. Oh, wait a minute. I have another one for you. That's great.
I know. Yeah, I guess I didn't approve of being fired. So,
Yeah.
But what was really interesting, this was the beginning of summer, and he started taking it just every day. And I really backed off. And then my older daughter was learning how to ride a two-wheeler bike. Mm-hmm. And any parent knows, it is brutal teaching your kid how to ride without training wheels.
Yep.
I consider myself to be in great shape and as healthy and fit. And I was hunched over, I was struggling, I was sweating, I started yelling and getting frustrated. And he's like, let me do this. And I was laughing, how can my husband, who can barely walk a block, try to teach our kids to ride a bike? And he was able to. And he ended up on his feet for more than I had seen him probably since we'd been married at the beginning.
Wow.
So I would say around 8 years at that point.
Wow.
And when we get home, he was in a lot of pain once he sat down, and, he had to recover, but he's like, I can't believe I could do that. And it wasn't about always wanting to push himself. He would do whatever he could for our children. But this was an extra push that he'd never been able to sort of do on his own. And the only difference that there was in his life was the CBD.
Wow.
And that's when all the alarms and bells and whistles and fireworks went off in my head to say that there is something here and I need to figure it out.
Okay. So help the listeners here today understand. Can you unpack what you learned on CBD? Because I think there's just a ton of misinformation out there. There is a huge need for education about it. So You found it, you threw him at it, even though you'd been fired, you still gave it to him. And then tell us what you learned.
So I started just doing some research on my own. And again, I'm a dietitian. I have a master's in science. This is my jam, right? This is like, this is what like I live for. And the first couple of articles I stumbled upon were about CBD and anxiety. And at that time, I had a big handful of patients in my practice who were emotional eaters that would lead to real binge behavior.
Okay.
And everything in my toolbox for them really wasn't working, right? Like the stuff that would work for my regular sort of overeaters, I could do. But there was a couple of them I just couldn't get through. And they had been longtime patients, and I offered them, the opportunity to try the CBD as well. And I said, I'm still researching, I'm learning, I trust that this is safe. And we came up with a strategy of when to use the CBD before their traditional binges, right? Or whenever that anxiety for them would peak. All 5 of them had massive turnarounds. Wow. And so again, more fireworks going off in my head, and I decided to enroll, and I did this, probably like an 8-month program to become a holistic cannabis practitioner, because there comes a point where I'm not comfortable recommending products if I'm not a true expert on it. So I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be able to recommend it to more people, but I didn't feel comfortable if I didn't have some sort of advanced degree about it. And so I enrolled in this program, and I'm learning all about cannabis in general, right? So, medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, everything from CBD and all the components of the plants and the history and the legal part. But the more that I learned about cannabis, and specifically CBD, I kept in my head saying, CBD is like the ultimate wellness vitamin, right? And the idea that I didn't learn about CBD when I was in school for dietetics, like, seems kind of crazy in hindsight, but it was also pre a lot of this research. Okay. And so I graduated the program, and I took my exams, and the whole time I said, I need to bring CBD to more people. There's plenty of products out there for someone like my husband, who suffers from a true illness, right? And whether he needs to take pills or a tincture, that was fine. But I started looking for products that would work for someone like me, or someone the majority of my clientele. And I couldn't find anything that didn't feel like medicine, or wasn't another pill to swallow. And trust me, we all have pill fatigue. There's only so many pills that a person can take, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And there's tinctures where you pour oil in your mouth, which just never sat right with me. And then there's gummies, which I wrote the book on the sugar, like the sugar detox. How could I be recommending gummies to people? So I searched high and low for a product that would make sense. And when I couldn't find it, I did what every, dumb entrepreneur does, and went ahead and created my own. So
tell me, what was missing when you looked around and you couldn't find what was missing? And then tell me, how did you fix it?
Sure. So what was missing was, one, this is an industry where there's very little transparency.
Yep.
So there's a couple of brands, like the one I gave my husband, which is Charlotte's Web, which I'm sure you've heard of. Yep. Charlotte's Web is the gold standard of real medicinal CBD. It is, it's based off of science and research, and really clinically proven to help a lot of people with real conditions. That said, I couldn't find more brands that were transparent. I wanted to know that the hemp was grown in the US. I wanted to know that it was in organic soil, because hemp is sort of as a biomodulator, and that it sucks up all the contaminants in the dirt and the soil, which is great because it's a great way to clean lands, that's been contaminated, like in Hiroshima. But not great when it's going to be a product you're going to consume. So I had all this criteria of what I was looking for, and the type of hemp I wanted to work with, and the type of CBD. And there just wasn't something that spoke to me. Okay. And as much as I like to think I'm some unique snowflake, I'm not, right? There's many people out there like me that are looking to feel better. My clients were, the prime example of people who were not sick, but anyone who was trying to optimize their wellness. And that's where Daily Habit came in. So what I created was a super high quality CBD product that was in powdered form. where the base was a coconut powder so that you can add it to your coffees or teas, and it sort of turns into a non-dairy creamer. So it's a pleasant thing to drink.
Okay.
Something that people would look forward to making every morning.
That's one thing, living here in the shadow of Boulder, everybody's got a thing to eat.
Mm-hmm.
My only problem that I've had, because I grew up on the standard American diet, the sad type of stuff. And I'm a picture of that today. And so friends would be sending me these products, and the problem with them is they tasted horrible. I'm like, I'm not getting up and eating that every day. I mean, give me a 8-ounce glass of celery juice. No, I hate that stuff. It tastes terrible, right? And so you spend some time making sure it wasn't like, my friend that told me to drink the celery juice, I'm like, that's just a glass of dirt water, man. I'm sorry. It tastes terrible. So you made some efforts to make sure it wasn't horrible, right?
Yeah, I wanted it to be a pleasant experience, right? So if this is something that I'm going to be recommending that people take most days,
right,
it needs to be part of this ritual that makes you feel really good. And when it comes to like people's brewing coffee or making their cup of coffee in the morning, that's something that people do regularly. That's not something they skip out of, right? Versus like adding a protein powder or taking another vitamin or supplement. I wanted it to be part of someone's everyday habit. And so it was really hard to make, which is why there was no other one of us on the market. So we became the first full spectrum CBD that was a powder on the market.
Okay.
Now, what full spectrum means, and I'm happy to geek out here a little bit.
Yeah, let's geek. Yep.
So we can talk about CBD, and that's sort of like just talking about vitamin C, right? It's one component of an orange or of the hemp plant, right? So it's CBD is one component. But there's also all these other awesome components in there. And a lot of them have the 3-letter abbreviation. So it's CBN, CBG, THC, which we all know, is where we really get high or stoned from. And all the sort of the stereotypes about pot or even hemp are more related to THC than anything else. And there's other, awesome other sort of, minerals and nutrients that are in this plant. So when you say full spectrum, you're not just getting CBD, but you're getting all the other compounds that are in the plant. So all the other cannabinoids, all the other, phytonutrients, antioxidants, you're getting everything good from the plant. And what happens is all those nutrients actually help make CBD work even better. So it's called like the entourage effect. I like to think of them as like backup singers,
Right.
It's like one person performing is awesome, but when you put together this entire chorus and, background singers and stuff, like it's a much more incredible show to watch. So it's the same thing. A full spectrum product is where everything works better to make CBD even more effective.
Okay. Now, help make sure that people understand what you're doing with CBD does not have any of the psychotropics, right?
Right. So cannabis is like this big umbrella term, and I like to break it down into two, right? So you have what we know as marijuana as one, it's just also known as cannabis. Right. And then the other component is hemp. The only difference between the two of those is the amount of THC. Okay. And THC is what gets you stoned or high, right? It's all those psycho, those reactions where you feel it, differently in your body. And so in order for something to be legally classified as hemp, it has to have 0.3% THC or less. Okay. Which means my product will occasionally on the third-party testing we do, will show very small amounts of THC, but there's not enough in it to actually give you any sort of stoned or high feeling. Okay, so if I really wanted to use that to get high, I'd probably have to drink a case of this stuff? You'd never get there. You would never get there. And look, that might be unfortunate for some people, but you live in Colorado, you'd be just fine. But yes, this is why this is legal, federally. Right. There's no, there's just none of those effects. That's teeny tiny amount of THC, though. Nothing. It's nothing at all. Right. It's nothing, but it's just enough to make CBD even better. Okay. And that's why you need it. So tell me a little bit, or educate us a little bit about your whole product chain, because you talked about needing it to grow in organic soils and just that kinds of stuff. Because
Here in Colorado, we have 5 different licenses that someone can get if they are, in the industry, in the cannabis industry. They range from people who just grow, and then there's people who formulate products, and then there's retail and medicinal licenses, distribution licenses. So let's back up a little bit and help our the people who are listening today. How did you go about finding the organic grower?
It was, I mean, in hindsight, it was a comedy of errors.
Okay.
I think in some ways I can be very naive to be like, I'm just going to reach out to someone, I don't know, maybe it's the New Yorker in me, maybe it's the cowgirl. I don't know, but I just started making phone calls. And then, even if someone wasn't able to help me, they would direct me to someone who may.
Right.
And I joined forums online. I really started looking for something very specific. And I stumbled across someone who introduced me to somebody else who said, actually, we're the only ones who make a full spectrum CBD powder.
Okay.
And, but then I had to do all of my due diligence to check where the farm was, to check how the soil was treated, to check what was growing, do all the extra testing. So it was a really long process. But once we found it, so currently our hemp is grown in Oregon on an organic farm there.
Okay.
And then it gets manufactured in California. So it turns from the beautiful leaves and plants into this powder. It goes from the leaves to an oil to a powder. And then our last batch would go to Texas to be combined with our coconut powder and our other, components and get packaged up. And then it was ready to sell.
Wow. I didn't realize you're a 3-state, and I'll just say right now, as somebody who doesn't like drinking dirt water, I'm glad you went to Texas and added the coconut to it. Just kidding. Most people don't realize the depth of what that takes, because that's important. Here in Colorado, when the marijuana industry just blossomed and bloomed, they had tons of growing operations that started up that were indoor. So it's climate controlled, constant light. And at one time in Denver, it was almost impossible to find warehouse space because there were so many growers trying to grow. And then that's kind of contracted some because there was a little bit of glut, but a lot of people don't understand the variations, whether things are grown indoors, outdoors, proper soils, whatever. So yeah, I commend you, because it's quite a process. And I've been involved in protein shakes and stuff like that, formulations of those. And it's a crazy business. It's a lot of work.
It is. And, I've worked with companies when I was consulting for nutrition, of creating products. I've never had to go through the same, steps and jumps because of working with a cannabis product.
Okay.
So even though it's made from hemp, even though there are no psychoactive, effects, even though there's, barely any THC, the legal steps, the extra protocols, it's, an extra year's worth of work compared to the supplements I would produce with the company, in the past. It's unreal.
Wow. So, okay. So your daily habit today, it's the powder. Who's going to benefit from that? I mean, you talked about being this ultimate supplement or vitamin. So who are the people who would really be educated so they would be able to use your product?
Well, I think it's important to understand what CBD does in your body.
Okay, yeah, let's go there. Yeah.
So we have something called the endocannabinoid system, and I promise I'll chill out with the fancy language, but it's basically in a system that's in all humans and also dogs and cats as well. And its ultimate goal is to help the body maintain homeostasis. So what I like to do is to have people think about what are things that sort of feel like your body's out of whack, right? Okay. So like to really break it down, like you're not sleeping well, you're having anxiety, you're having some pain, you're stressed, you're, emotionally eating, all those kind of things where it's like, I'm not sick enough to actually need medication, but I'm not feeling 100% like a rock star. Right. And I think that in those moments, that's when CBD can be so beneficial. because by consuming high quality CBD, ideally full spectrum, it sort of notifies that system in your body and it helps bring it back to homeostasis. It gets you rebalanced, right? So poor sleep is that you're off kilter, right? Feeling anxious and stressed and those emotions, you're off kilter. Right. And so anything that needs to be back to baseline, is something that can really benefit from a CBD product.
Okay. Yeah. Here in Colorado, we see lots of it around. I mean, you see it in gas stations and stuff. Again, Colorado being the first state to legalize both retail and medicinal, it's a culture here. I mean, in fact, at one time, it was bringing about 100,000 people a year into the state just because of, the environment. And so when you formulated and put yours together, it really is different than the guys that I can buy it in the gas station, right?
I mean, I can't speak for all gas station brands, but the truth is super high quality product is going to cost money.
Right.
It's just the way it is, right? So we're a small company. We do small batches when we manufacture, so our price is high. But, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be taking like budget medicine to begin with, right? I don't give my kids crappy Motrin, right? So it's I think it's important to get quality. And so I have two thoughts about these brands, right? So one thing that they're in gas stations or you're seeing CBD everywhere, that's great because the more people see those three letters, the more willing they are going to be to drop the stigma associated with it, understand it's not pot, right? And just be more comfortable with it, right? But then you've got people trying these poor quality brands and saying, oh, well, I took CBD that I bought at the gas station or even something expensive online that was poorly made. And they're gonna be like, it did nothing for me.
Right.
So, I'm torn because I want the more, whether it's my company or anybody else's, the more people see those letters, the more comfortable we're gonna get with it. Mm-hmm. But I also don't want people to have that poor experience and then have it turn them away from actually using a good quality product and knowing that it can help them.
Wow. So I just find this so interesting because so few people really understand the differences. And, you've really helped us a lot in doing this. So tell me, can you share your website for our listeners for us? I mean, we don't try to turn this into a big info commercial, but people need to get to your stuff. So what's your website? Sure.
It's dailyhabitcbd.com.
Okay. So what's next on the horizon for Daily Habit? I mean, every entrepreneur has today, but they're also thinking ahead. Do you have some ahead things you're willing to talk about today?
Sure. I have lots of dreams for this little company. Right now, it's really just me running it.
Yep.
It's just me. So every customer support question, every order issue, everything, you're speaking directly to me. And it's funny, I'll sometimes use we here at Daily Habit, but it's all me. We is me. So
I talk in the plural all the time, even about my podcast. And it's like, you got a mouse in your pocket?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So I'd love to grow the business. I'd love for it to become widely known. I'd love to be able to help more people. I mean, that's what I started, when I wanted to become a dietitian. I wanted to help people feel better. And my goal for working in the cannabis industry, specifically CBD, is to make people feel better.
Right.
And getting able to do that without having to say, don't eat this, right?
Yeah.
is a real blessing for me. So I want to help more people feel better. And so, we currently have 2 SKUs. One of them is sold out. So we're about to go into production again.
Okay.
But I think expansion is in the future. So hopefully in the next year, we'll have flavors coming out, more products, and that we could just be more places.
So my audience is a little bit international. Are you shipping in just the US and Canada, or do you ship all over the world, or?
Just in the US at this time.
In the US. Okay, great. That helps our listeners. Yeah. Are there regulations you have to deal with to ship it to other countries?
Yeah, it's complicated. So we'll get wholesale inquiries about, shipping overseas, and that we can do, right? So it's just the direct to consumer, to someone in South America or over in Europe. We just don't have the team to be able to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, I congratulate you on your product's name because in my other business, we do a lot of traffic for dispensaries and other products that are associated with it. And you didn't do a knucklehead name. I mean, you walk into a dispensary and it's all these goofy names. And it's just like, I don't want Maui Gold, all right? I don't want Dragon's Breath, okay? I don't want that, you know? Or I even laugh at Charlotte's Web. I'm like, well, what is that? I mean, there's nothing that connotates what I should be using it for. So at least.
Well, let me just say one thing. Charlotte's Web was named after the girl that inspired the product. So,
Okay.
who had a very severe form of epilepsy. So
Oh.
we can give them a break because.
Okay. All right. I'll give them the break.
There's plenty of other companies we can make fun of. No problem.
Oh yeah. You know, I envisioned somebody was sitting on their couch and watching the cartoon from Charlotte's Web and said, "That's what we're naming this baby." So,
you know, their story is really beautiful. So.
well, that's a great to know. Well, I appreciate that. Now, one element I'm not sure if it steps into being out of balance, being very close to individuals who have brain chemistry issues, mental health and stuff. Is there a contributing fact that CBD can help in that particular area?
You know, I think that the research for CBD and mood disorders and more clinical issues is out there.
Okay.
That said, for anyone who is on, you know, already prescription medication for a mood disorder, you need to speak to your doctor before starting any supplement,
Sure.
Especially one like CBD. So that's really important to always have an open conversation with whoever your physician is about that. I think there's a lot of things that CBD can do for a lot of conditions.
Okay.
But for any serious conditions, you need to go through your medical doctor.
Absolutely. So how often are you in the media? It looks like you've done quite a bit of stuff. Are you still out there a lot?
You know, definitely through the last year of the pandemic, it's less.
Yes.
You know, a lot more just sort of, you know, magazine articles or articles I'm writing myself, you know, for online publications. So it's definitely switched. You know, and I also think that this has been a great lesson in sort of following what I'm really passionate about. And while I still love nutrition and diet and health and talk like that, you know, the opportunities I have to go on TV and talk about fiber or fat or sugar, they're becoming a lot less interesting.
Right.
So, you know, while my publicist in the past would be really disappointed, I've turned down a lot of that work because I don't want my messages to get confusing. So focusing more on CBD than anything is kind of what I do.
Yeah. The entire diet and health related, you know, type industry, it's really flooded with just a lot of stuff. And so anyone's message can get lost. And so I think, you know, I have several interview guests coming up that are in that space. And when I look for those interviews, I look for someone that's doing something different or unique, you know, because, you know, if you look at, like, you go on LinkedIn and look for life coaches, I mean, gosh, you could pave the streets of Denver with those and you know, nutrition specialists and stuff. And if they're not doing anything interesting, well, then they're just another barking dog. You know, back in my early days of radio, I had a mentor say, well, there's an audience for barking dog if you market correctly, right? So I really appreciate that you're doing something very unique because there aren't a lot of people who have a really in-depth and focused message what they're doing. And I think you're on a frontier marketplace. I think there's a lot of research to do out there. I think there's a lot of uses for it. And still there's that stigma because hemp products and CBD are linked because they come out of the same plant as marijuana. You know, everybody's like, well, if I take CBD, am I going to be the pothead? You know, nobody wants to do that. So I think there are some challenges for the general public for them to get educated. You know, I really do.
Yeah, I think it's education about CBD, but also, you know, cannabis in general.
Right.
You know, I find it so funny that, in the moms communities that I'm in, that no one has a problem saying, oh, you know, can I drink yet? Is it time? You know, is it 5 o'clock yet? It's, you know, this is mommy juice, you know, and really sort of talking about alcohol very openly. And yet, you know, I'm still sort of considered like a rebel because I work in the CBD industry. I mean, I don't even drink alcohol. It's just not something I enjoy. You know, and yet it's like I'm the you know, the edgier one. It's kind of comical in hindsight. But I think that ideally, you know, people are just going to become more and more open. And now with the new, you know, administration in the White House and what's going to happen with New Jersey and Massachusetts legalities, I think that we're only going to go in the right direction for the next couple of years. So hopefully we can mainstream a little bit more.
You know, I think that ship has sailed. It's just a matter of going ahead and getting the legislation through. You know, my father was in a law enforcement as a police officer, and this was at least 40 years ago. He was a very conservative person. He was all in favor of legalization of marijuana. And he would say, you know, the weed has been growing in the bar ditch forever. You know, you can get this everywhere. And he's like, let's get this, the criminal element out of it. Because he says, you never see someone getting stabbed in a alley over a 12-pack of Budweiser. You just don't. So way back in the day, 40 years ago, he was just like, you know, let's get this out. Let's put it into every Safeway and King Soopers and Kroger's and Walmart and just get it distributed, because there's a lot of good for this, but get the criminal element out. I remember here in Colorado when things went legal, in just the city and county of Denver, when they legalized recreational, the court in Denver County dismissed 15,000 plus cases and stuff. And then when, at the same time, when medical was here, there were a lot of people crossing lines. So you had all these 22, 25-year-old kids with medical problems. And there's there was one doctor there that was like issuing just, you know, prescription after prescription. So it was hilarious when they legalized it. My dad said, you know, to me, because he was still with us at that time, he said, well, we just legitimized a whole bunch of people who had been cheating the system for all this time. So there are a lot of stigmas with it, you know, there, but I believe it's an industry that's becoming mainstream. The states, I think a long time here will be, you know, we'll get federal there. And I don't think it's something that people, and again, I don't usually get into politics, but I think it's one of those things where it's a choice, and it's a choice anybody should have. And if they want to use it, you know, any of it, well then, okay, that's your personal choice, as long as you're not injuring other people. So,
you know, what's crazy, a congresswoman, I mean, within the last week, basically posted something about the legalization of marijuana is going to lead to thousands and thousands of overdoses. Which is such misinformation. There's never been one case of someone dying from a marijuana overdose. There's no such thing as a marijuana overdose. So it's, you know, I am very much for the legalization, but just as what Colorado did with the criminal courts, we cannot have legalization without taking a look at the records of the people who are sitting behind bars. Yeah. And expunging their records, and especially the proponents of, you know, Black and brown men who are basically in jail or in prison for doing stuff that is legal in a significant amount of states now. So it's something that I want to, you know, as we're able to build, the more work we can do, whether it's for the Innocence Project, I think it's really important for any of us who are in this industry to understand that there are people who have suffered, you know, unfairly due to this business. So we need to make right.
Well, it's really interesting. It's a funny backstory. When Peyton Manning moved to Denver, started playing for the Broncos, behind the scene, and he still lives here now. That's where he's raising his family. Most people don't know that. Well, behind the scenes, after he got to Denver, you know, and those guys make insane money, you know, like $20 million a year. He purchased all of the Papa John's franchises. And his business decision to do that was because of the legalization of marijuana here, because he's like, people would ask him, do you own those Papa John's? Does that have any impact? He goes, oh, we love it here. So he ended up selling it later on, but he always used to joke about, I don't remember the line, so I won't misquote him, but he was always joking about, well, because we have legal recreational drugs here, I got a great business going on for pizza. So
it's very smart. Yeah, it's like the Girl Scouts who opened up outside of the dispensaries, right?
yeah, exactly.
People there, very clever.
Well, this has been an enjoyable interview, Brooke. I hope to have you back in the future here one more time so people can get it. Can you give us your websites then?
Sure, it's dailyhabitcbd.com.
Okay.
Just as it sounds.
Just as it sounds.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to get to know you. It's been a pleasure, and we'll have you back. We absolutely will have you back to see this, because I think there's even more depth that we can go into as you being an expert in this field and what's happening in the world out there. So thank you for coming on. We'll end it there. For our listeners, thank you for tuning in to the Rex Andrews Show. We're thankful for you coming along and participating, learning something today, seeing life stories. That's what it's all about. So until next time, be safe out there, be bold, and make it a great day. Thank you.